When the holidays start to feel a bit repetitive, reach for a Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry and put your twist on tradition. A bold cranberry and winter spice flavor fusion, Sprite Winter Spiced Cranberry is a refreshing way to shake things up this sipping season. And only for a limited time. Sprite. Obey your thirst.
This episode is brought to you by McAfee.
Yes! Playoff tickets! Just need to click here and... Wait, what? Fake site? Good thing McAfee threw the red flag. That would have been $400 gone.
McAfee blocks risky sites so you don't pay for seats and other things that don't exist. Plans start at just $39.99 for your first year. That's cheaper than parking on game day. Learn more at McAfee.com/online protection.
This episode is brought to you by NBA on Prime. This Tuesday at 8:30 Eastern, it's the Emirates NBA Cup Championship game on Prime. This year's quest for the Cup has been building to this, the championship game, live from Las Vegas. Not a Prime member? Sign up for a 30-day free trial to get started today. The Emirates NBA Cup Championship game, this Tuesday at 8:30 Eastern, only on Prime. Restrictions apply. See Amazon.com/Amazon Prime for details.
This episode of Haway The Podcast is sponsored by LiveScoreBet, a principal partner of Sunderland AFC. LiveScoreBet is the home of the total betting experience, combining live scores, real-time updates and stats with great odds and offers, all in one slick, easy-to-use betting app. For more information, visit livescorebet.com or download the LiveScoreBet app. And please remember, over 18s only, and please bet responsibly. For more information, go to gambleaware.org. Hello everyone and welcome to Haway The Podcast, sponsored by LiveScoreBet. It's Gav and you join us for one of our pods this week as we build up to the big game on Sunday at the Stadium Light as Sunderland take on them up the road in the WEAR-TYNE derby. I have got that bit right because it was Bomber the other day on the pod kept calling it a Tyne-Wear derby. The Tyne-Wear derby is in March, so I'm just making sure we get that one right. But yes, the game this weekend, which is coming up, that everybody I'm sure isn't nervous about whatsoever. We're about to chat a little bit more about it. And today, first off, on the other side of the mic is Chris Wynn, and he feels a little bit weird in this position, don't you, mate?
It is. Normally I know what's coming, and I've got my little notes and everything, and I can say, oh, we're going in this direction. I know what I'm going to waffle about, but I don't know what you're going to throw at us, and you're making us nervous, Gav.
Well, yeah, it's a bit late, isn't it? We're recording this quite late at night, so I'm not gonna put you on the spot too much, mate. I'll not embarrass you in front of all the listeners. So you're all right.
It's the nerves of your questions on top of the nerves of this week, and we're creeping ever closer to the weekend, and you can just feel it's just bubbling up day by day. And it's just as we get closer, the nerves are jangling a bit.
Well, let's see how your nerves are by the time we finish recording today. Our guest today is a man who has never joined us. We're 300 episodes in, and it's the first time that we've been joined by Mark Douglas from the newspaper. Hello, mate.
Hello, you okay, guys?
Yes, very good. You asked how we were when you joined the call before we hit record. How are you? How are you feeling about the derby?
I can't wait. I've got the beauty of not supporting either team. So I'm sorry, but you guys will be all feeling nervous. I'm just looking forward to it. I can't wait. But I know everybody listening to this and everybody living the other side of the water is totally different because I've been chatting to a few people. I've been playing six-a-side tonight, and I've been chatting to some people tonight, and they're absolutely bricking it. You guys are bricking it. Everybody that I speak to, load of Sunderland fans that I know are saying, I don't want to dare to believe that we can do something that we didn't think we could do the last time we played. Newcastle fans are sitting there going, we thought at the start of this season this would be much more straightforward game than it's actually going to be. So to think the whole region is looking forward to it, but nervous, just this kind of feeling of it. And I'm sort of sat in the middle, like Switzerland, just kind of going, can't wait, bring it on. And everybody else is going, no, I don't want to. I can't wait. And I think because the trajectories of the two teams have kind of matched each other. And at one point, probably 2-3 weeks ago, I would have said Sunderland were favourites, clear favourites actually because of Newcastle's away record. I think it's funny actually because somebody said to me tonight, well, the Sunderland, their good form sort of ended up. Well, they lost to Manchester City on Saturday. You lost to Manchester City on Saturday. That is not a bubble burst moment. That is like something that this is like a week ago drawing at the champions and should have won that game as well. So, and Newcastle were fortunate to beat Burnley as well. So I just think the two teams are fairly evenly matched for the weekend. I couldn't call it. And I think it's just going to be a fantastic game. I'm glad that the players haven't got off to AFCON until after this weekend, because I think it would have probably taken something away from the game a little bit. Because as a neutral, you want both teams going at it, both teams fully, everybody fit, everybody going at it and going for it. So I can't wait.
How are your nerves, Chris? We're recording this as Tuesday night, so there's still a good few days, isn't there, till we play Newcastle. But like Mark says, a lot of the people I'm talking to are really nervous. You know me, I'm not nervous. I don't get nervous. But I might be a bit closer to the big day. But a lot of people I've spoke to over the last couple of days are absolutely bricking it, and understandably so. I get it. It doesn't affect me in that way. But how are you?
Well, you're a machine, Gav. You just kind of plough through, even when you never suffer from hangovers either, which I still don't understand. But yeah, like Mark's just kind of raised a good point there, that on both sides, everybody's nervous, and it's because of how this game's been set up. I mean, you look at what was it? That game was just over 2 years ago, or just around 2 years ago, that cup game. And then before that, it's nearly 10 years since we last played in the league. And if you look back at those league games, I mean, what is it? I think we haven't lost in how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
15 years or whatever that is.
15 years, 9 games, something like that. But, when you go back to those games that we were winning, we were going into a lot of those games kind of almost shrugging our shoulders going, oh, well, we don't really expect much. And then we were winning 3-0, which is why we kind of celebrated so much when we won those games, because it almost wasn't expected. This one's a really strange one, because from our point of view, we're thinking we can almost show that we're on equal terms with Newcastle United now, and we can try and prove that in one game. And Newcastle United are thinking, well, who were these upstarts that 2 years ago we swatted them away, and they should be kind of almost put in their place? And we've almost put a lot of pressure on Newcastle with this game coming up because of the start we've got off to and how well we've done this season. And Newcastle won something like 3 out of the first 11 or something like that. Okay, they've won, I think it's 3 out of the last 4 or something like that to really leap up the table. But there was a lot of pressure on Newcastle at the start of the season, and this game seems to have kind of come to a crescendo that like both sides are thinking this means so much, because in the grand scheme of things, it's a game in the middle of the season against 2 mid-table sides, 3 points at stake. You think, well, there's not that much at stake, but actually there is, in terms of where the two clubs stand and where fans can think, oh, actually, we're both level and it's going to be kind of to and fro on who finishes higher in the league. But maybe if Newcastle win and they get that momentum, then they're going to be saying, no, we're the better side. It just seems like there's just that much riding on it because of how it's all built up over the last couple of years.
Yeah, we'll take a couple of steps back, I guess, Mark, and, before we get back into the derby a little bit. But your day job must have changed quite a bit this season, has it? Because, with Sunderland stepping into the Premier League, all of a sudden you've got more than one team to cover.
Yeah, it's been a weird one, actually, because obviously I used to work, when I first came to the North East, I worked for the Journal, and it was a 50-50 split between Newcastle and Sunderland. So I used to, it's a funny one because you come into it from not having much of a North East background. And I kind of, my dad actually worked for Sunderland when I was a kid. That's how we ended up being up here. So that was kind of back in the mid-80s. So he actually was at the Milk Cup final against Norwich. One of his biggest kind of professional disappointments, I think, was how bad that performance was. He still talks about it to this day. There's a video I've got somewhere of a kind of Tyne Tees thing where he was interviewed doing the tickets and stuff beforehand. So kind of like Sunderland was, for me, was like a lot of my family were kind of Newcastle, or like a lot of family friends were Newcastle. And then we had a lot of family friends who were Sunderland as well. So it was 50-50. I came up, my old sports editor is a massive Sunderland fan as well. And we kind of, funny in the Journal, really, it was more Sunderland than it was Newcastle. So it was 50-50 then. Then they kind of moved me into doing more stuff for the Chronicle. So I ended up doing quite a lot of Newcastle, went to the Eye, and obviously Sunderland were the league one at the time. But one of the first stories I did was when I came back, because it's quite nice because I just got to do a bit at Sunderland. And I went down to the Stadium of Light because I knew the guys at a thing called Orico, who were kind of early adopters when Sunderland was still doing quite a lot of this kind of like breakthrough kind of, they were doing a lot of stuff that was obviously unseen. And because they weren't doing particularly well in the league, I don't think the fans kind of wanted to, I think fans outside of Sunderland didn't want to hear those stories necessarily because they were like, well, they're in League One. But there was a lot of technological stuff that they were trying to do at the time. And I remember going down and speaking to Luke O'Nien and being like, do you know what? They're trying something here. And I was kind of quite early on trying to sell this idea that Sunderland, do you know what? They're a different team from the one that I covered when Ellis Short was there. And he was trying to chuck money at it. And maybe there was a bit of wastefulness about Sunderland at the time, that where I felt they were doing okay in terms of staying in the Premier League, but it never felt like they were going to try and build something. But then you kind of took it back a little bit to when I started back at the Eye paper, and it was very much like Sunderland were kind of on the start of this new journey. But of course, until you get results, until Speakman came in, until Kirill really got his feet under the table and started putting in place this plan, which we've kind of seen the fruition, we've kind of seen come into fruition now. It was piecemeal. There wasn't much money behind it, I think. And what changed, I think, when Kirill got full control was you started to see a bit of like actual investment, not just kind of piecemeal sort of stuff they were doing. And I was just fascinated by it. So I did do quite a few stories when they were in the Championship and League One, but obviously didn't get to too many games because the problem is, as a national newspaper, you know, it's difficult with games now anyway. Like I keep saying this to people, you know, there isn't as much demand to go to games and read match reports now. They're kind of the things that do worse for us. So actually going to a Saturday game, it's quite hard to get the page views and things like that for it. So when you're in Championship and League One, it's even harder to kind of sell to your desk to kind of go to the games. But this year it's been brilliant because I went to the first game of the season. Absolutely, you know, that was, I mean, I did the, obviously the Coventry game, the second playoff game last year, and it came about 2 weeks, I think, after my team, Bradford, kind of got promotion in the last minute. And I was like, I can't believe this. That is two of the best moments in terms of like, you know, single moments that you're going to see at the end of the season. And obviously, and, you know, I know your listeners won't be particularly keen to hear, but the seeing Newcastle win a trophy that season as well, it was just like, this is a season from like ridiculous, like all these things are happening. So to see Sunderland go up, to see Newcastle win a trophy, to see my own team kind of get promoted, it was absolutely amazing. And then I've always said to have two teams in the Premier League that actually deserve to be there and are great stories is brilliant. And what I've loved this season is my sports editor's been kind of saying on a Monday, right, give us some more Sunderland stuff, because it has been, you know, just a great story. And people outside the region have missed what's been going on at Sunderland. It's been this kind of idea of, oh, there are another Leeds, they're coming up and they're trying to spend big on this. But I kind of was selling the story early on. I was like, no, look, they're trying to do something different here. It may work, it may not work, but you can't deny that there's something going on at Sunderland that is unique and innovative in football. And I think what's been nice is, you know, that anybody who's kind of followed that journey through, and there's been a few of us in the North East Pack who've kind of followed that journey through, have been able to kind of write from a kind of a bit more of a position of authority on it than maybe some of the people who from outside the region who've kind of just picked up on it and gone, hold on, they've signed a load of players. And, you know, I think it was quite funny the other week when you kind of saw, I think before he played Manchester United, there were quite a few people sort of talking about what's happening at Sunderland. You just thought, like, this stuff's been going on for 2 years. You know, when Reggie came in, that was, you know, Sunderland fans were not, there was a bit of Michael Beale obviously getting sacked and that whole period of time in between that and bringing Reggie in. But I think by that point, it was obvious that there was something going on at Sunderland, and they were going to take a big run up at it. And it may have failed, it may not have failed. But I always say a club that has a plan and tries to do something different is better than a club like, for example, Burnley, who are coming up trying to do the same thing and probably going to get relegated. And I think that's what, for me, has been so exciting this season. So yeah, jobs changed and so much for the better. And I just you know, in some ways, kind of, if Middlesbrough come up as well, I'm just going to be far too busy, you know. So I kind of, you know, I'm not saying anything. I don't want any Teesside readers to kind of read that and say, oh God, he doesn't want Middlesbrough to go. But if they come up as well, it's just going to be absolute carnage. But Yeah, it's been brilliant. It's been really, really enjoyable this season to see Sunderland do well. And I predicted at the start of the season they were going to finish 12th. And everybody on my desk was going, you're pretty optimistic there with Sunderland. And now I kind of go back and I say, do you know what? I wasn't optimistic enough. Because I think they'll finish top 10, no problem. Yeah. And, if they do sign players in January, which I think will happen, I think you could kind of ride out the AFCON dip, if you will. And why not dream of the Conference League? It's a wide open league this year. The Champions League is going to cause absolute chaos, I think, moving into the second half of the season. Why not? Why not? I've always said this is a really good Sunderland team that don't know when they're beaten. Momentum is absolutely key in the Premier League. So I'm optimistic about where this season is going to go for Sunderland. I really am.
Yeah, I can't believe you were that pessimistic saying 12th, to be honest. But I just wanted to touch on something you said there, because you said you talked about the West Ham game. And look, I might be biased because obviously being a Sunderland fan and all that sort of stuff, looking at it through Sunderland glasses. But you look at the Premier League the last couple of years, and, from the outsiders like we're watching the Premier League thinking, God, it looks dull. It looks dull at the bottom, looks dull at the top. Title wins, weeks before the end of the season. I think the Champions League was sewn up last season, and, relegation people just going down straight away. And we've come up into this. And I honestly do think that Sunderland have played a big part in almost refreshing the Premier League this season. And I think the Premier League needed it, that a club like Sunderland just to come up and not, roll over and go, oh yeah, go on, then just, beat us 2-0, 3-0, and we'll just allow you to walk all over us. We've been in the faces of teams, and we've gone toe to toe with them. We haven't, we went to Chelsea. We just didn't sit on the edge of the box. We had a plan to actually go and get 3 points, and you could see what the plan was when there was about 20 minutes to go. But I was going to say into that, do you think that has been, we can go through the kind of off the field plan, if you like, and how we've built it. But in terms of how we've built each game up to be a huge, almost like a cup final type feeling, just to get 3 points, do you think that's been a huge part of it as well?
Absolutely massive, yeah. And I totally agree with you. I think we've had 2 years where the teams that have been promoted have kind of, I think, fair play to Ipswich, they did have a go at it in terms of the transfer market, but it did feel like a lot of their signings were signings that they made in order to, like, if we get relegated, they'll bring us back up. The difference with Sunderland was they went out and got players who, very, very good players, but risks in a way. It is easy to say now because all the players I think they've signed, I think there's maybe 1 or 2 you could say the jury's out on, but most of the players who've come in have been tremendous successes and have really, really worked well. And I think you've seen kind of Gisolfi saying last week, I think in a really good piece with Michael Walker in The Athletic, that, look, a lot of these players that we signed, nobody else wanted to take a risk on because they saw the AFCON coming up. It was a month of football that we weren't going to, they weren't going to be able to play for whichever team was playing for them. Sunderland took the risk. And I think that off-field stuff has been replicated on the field because they have taken risks. And what was my favourite game of the season so far, obviously, I love the West Ham game because it was, for me, the narrative was a team, West Ham, and obviously, I know they have recovered a little bit under Nuno, but they were a team that felt like we're going to be okay this season because the 3 teams that come up are going to be as weak as they were last year. So we'll be fine. We'll just kind of bumble along. We'll kind of have a plan. And it was like they had about 20 minutes in that game where it looked like they were kind of asserting themselves a little bit. And Sunderland just sort of punched them on the nose. It was that kind of like, the goals were just, I mean, Sunderland played really well in that game. But the goals were just kind of like brilliant, sort of exactly what Sunderland have been for the best part of the end of last season, and before the kind of the dip at the end of last season, where it was just like direct, quick, pacey, strong football. And you were just like, this is what you needed. And it was just that kind of moment, I think. And it just brought belief to everybody at the stadium, like that day, because you were like, actually, this plan works against teams that should be kind of a level above us, if you will, but actually they're not, and Sunderland have gone into all of those games against teams kind of around them in the Premier League and just looked like fresher, more energy, belief. And, it has been so refreshing. And I think it will change the Premier League because teams that come up now will look at Sunderland and say, look, we've got to do things a little bit differently. Burnley have come up and kind of done things the same way that Burnley always do it. And I think are going to get relegated. I think Leeds will be okay, possibly, because they've got that kind of Ellen Road factor. But Sunderland have got the Stadium of Light factor, plus they've got good players. And look, let's be honest, in the manager, they've got a manager who I think is absolutely top drawer. And he's, what I love about him is he's had different plans for all these games. And what I think will happen on Sunday is you'll see he'll have a different plan against Newcastle than he had against Liverpool, than he had against Arsenal in that home game, than he had against Everton, in the second half when they kind of ran the game. And it'll be really interesting to see what he actually does, whether he decides to kind of step on Newcastle, because Newcastle are a team that are all about intensity. Newcastle need to go out, and they've been away from home. They've kind of not really done that. And I think that the game against Everton, they tried to sort of step on the toes and get on Everton, and it worked for them. If they try to do that against Sunderland, it'd be really interesting to see what Sunderland do, whether Sunderland say, right, we're gonna give it you back, because obviously Newcastle have got a game tomorrow. I think they can't afford to lose that game. So it will be absolutely fascinating to see what Sunderland do. But yeah, I totally agree with you. It's been a breath of fresh air. And obviously, I wrote a piece after they beat Coventry saying the Premier League needs Sunderland. And I got quite a lot of comments, because the team at the time didn't look like it was ready for the Premier League. And if it had been that team, I think we probably would have said it would be a Burnley situation where you're picking up 7 points by this point, 10 points maybe by this point. And you're kind of like, are they going to be able to stay in the Premier League? But because they've refreshed and kind of said, look, it doesn't matter what you did in the Championship season. You either need to step up to this level that we're getting to or not. That's what I think has been the big difference that Sunderland have done. And that's why it's been so refreshing, because you knew that the crowd was going to be up for it. But they needed a team that were going to be able to justify that energy, because we've been there with Sunderland before. We've been there where by this point in the season, it's been a struggle and it's hard, and it can be very difficult, I think, at times to maintain the energy levels and all those kind of things. And they needed a team that were going to be able to kind of do what they've done. And, it has just added this fresh energy. And, the games, it's so much more interesting saying Sunderland against Everton, Sunderland against Arsenal, than it is, with the greatest of respect, some of the teams that have kind of bounced up and down the leagues who haven't really been competitive. It's so fun to see Sunderland doing what they've done.
Yeah, we'll circle back round to the derby after the break. But before we do head off for a break, I did want to ask you about something which you wrote about last week, which was really interesting. I thought there's a piece on iNews from yourself about the upcoming transfer window for Sunderland and kind of strategy and the way we're going to go forward. And I think, it got quite a lot of attention from fans, because there was stuff in there around the approach to it and the fact that we're almost looking at the transfer window as an opportunity to kick on even further than we already have. From what you've heard, then is that the case? Is it that Sunderland are going to go out there and they're going to really try and hit the transfer market and make full use of it?
Yeah, it's quite interesting, because in recruitment circles, the noises around Sunderland before they got into the Premier League were, I think really positive, because obviously I think they've embedded themselves in quite a lot of markets that other teams in the Premier League have almost given up on. If you look at the most money that was spent by elite teams last year in the Premier League, it was actually quite a lot of it came through the British market. A lot of teams spending a lot of money on players that have proven themselves in the Premier League. Sunderland went in on markets that traditionally those kind of teams thought they could take players from and would translate straight into be kind of, they could be in the Arsenal team, they could be in Chelsea. Sunderland have targeted those markets so well that it just feels like they've embedded themselves there, and they've kind of been able to sell a story. I think it's, your readers your listeners, will have heard by now about the WhatsApp video clip that's been sent to prospective players. It's kind of like a very short, bite-sized kind of clip of what Sunderland's all about, the kind of DNA of Sunderland. When you speak to kind of agents, as I do quite a lot, they've seen those videos, and players are kind of buying into it. And obviously, it was difficult in the summer to sell the dream to players at maybe the next level, if you will. But I think what's been really interesting is obviously Sunderland have got money. There's no doubt about it. They've got PSR headroom. They've got money because they know that they know. Nobody at the club will admit this. They know they're going to be in the Premier League next year. And I'm sure there's probably people who are listening to this who are Sunderland fans who've got that kind of pessimistic head on, who say, don't say that. We could collapse. It's going to be okay. You're going to be in the Premier League next season. So there you've got a guaranteed money. So you can kind of move to that next level. And what I think is really interesting is the noises that you hear from a lot of teams in the Premier League are we aren't looking at the January transfer window. We're looking at a summer transfer window. Sunderland obviously have got players going off to AFCON. So they've deliberately done business where they can target January. And I think they will be really reactive. I think you saw in the summer, Gisolfi's got unbelievable contacts in some markets. And I was, I wrote in the piece, it was Portugal was one of the markets that I heard that they were looking at as well, which is really interesting because it's, again, not a market that I think a lot of Premier League teams have looked at. We know Belgium, we know France. And what was interesting was obviously the Canal Plus kind of mini documentary it was a behind the scenes thing. That wasn't a coincidence that documentary was kind of like they were allowed the kind of access they were allowed, because it's a kind of billboard, if you will, to that French market. And it's almost saying to agents, to players, look at what we're doing here. They're selling themselves to that French market. So the noises that we're hearing are that they are going to be proactive in January. Obviously, it'll have to be the right players again. You've seen in the past they've kind of, it was really interesting, obviously, because Brian Brobby coming in at the end of the window looked like an opportunistic. This is a player that's kind of been offered to us, so we've gone for it. But when you speak to people at Sunderland, they say actually that's not the case at all. It was, we had him on our list for 12 months. We knew in the summer that we wanted him. He became available. We had the striker spot. So they do have kind of long, medium, and long-term targets. And I think they think that maybe in January there's a chance to maybe press fast forward on some of those targets as well in January. So it's going to be an interesting one. I think there'll be more players coming in and more attacking players coming in, but it's always difficult to kind of predict exactly what's going to happen in January because it depends on other clubs kind of coming in for players. But there's money there, and from what I'm hearing, there's willing there as well. So it could be 2 or 3 coming in January, which would be amazing when you consider the volume of players that came in the summer as well. But if you do that, I think probably maybe the summer will be more about a targeted 1 or 2 coming in. And there could be outgoings as well. Obviously, they do have players who haven't played as many games in the first part of the season, and I think could get moves. There'd be championship teams that probably would look at them as well. It's whether they feel that that they will probably get opportunities in January because players are going off to AFCON, and it's whether they sort of feel like they want to, kind of pitch themselves to play a few more games. But yeah, I mean, really interesting what they do in January, because I do think that they are looking at kind of getting in there. And you've seen from the way that they acted in the summer, they're not afraid of bringing in players to kind of compete for starting roles as well, which I think is really interesting, because most teams in January say we're not going to do much. It's not, we're not potentially going to be active, but that's not the noises coming from Sunderland. And there's 1 or 2 sort of bigger names, I think, who they could potentially target and potentially look at as well, because they are, they're not a risk anymore, are they? I don't think they're a risk in the same way that they would have been in the summer. You had to kind of almost believe the hype and believe what Sunderland's people were telling you in the summer. I don't think you have to do that anymore because the results are there.
Yeah, it's almost about being opportunistic, isn't it, Chris? Trying to maybe take advantage of the fact that a lot of teams don't act in January. We've got the room to do it. Clearly, you kind of see in the way Labrie makes these changes in games and stuff. He's got like a select 3 or 4 that he likes to turn to in games, which makes me think he's not as happy with the squad depth as maybe I probably would be, as somebody who just loves everything. You know what I mean? So, but you can see us going early, Chris, can't you, in the window, and maybe getting 1 or 2 very early on, particularly with quite a lot of players going off to the Cup of Nations. I can well imagine we might even have 1 or 2 already lined up, ready to come in.
Yeah, well, we've said that kind of windows going back, I don't know how long now, kind of 3 or 4 years, where you almost expect them to have them lined up, and you also expect to never have heard of the player until you go, right, well, I've got to look up this player now. But the other thing, you've got Diarra as well, who, he only played a few games, and he's going to be like a new signing when he comes back. It's going to be like he'll slot straight into that midfield. You've got, one of the heroes of last season, Mayenda, who's probably played less than 90 minutes in total. He got about an hour at Burnley before he got pulled off, and I think that was the only game he started. And otherwise,
West Ham, did he not start West Ham as well?
Did he start West Ham? But
yeah.
Let's say he's had 90 minutes or so, all season. So he's played like a bit part. And does he need a loan move out? As Mark was saying, do these players need more minutes? Do their agents going to be knocking on the door saying, these players need minutes in the Championship or something like that to put themselves in the shop window. You've got the Dan Neil situation, the Dennis Serkin situation. So there's going to be a lot of movement. So we are expecting, players to move out. And if he's worried about his strength and depth now, if those players do move on, then it's guaranteed he's going to have to fill those spots and then maybe add a couple of more on top of them, depending on how many. Because if, let's say, Dan Neil leaves and he wanted one more, then that's 2 players he's going to have to bring in. So it might work out something like that. But again, something that Mark mentioned earlier on, the summer was almost hitting that button and just saying, right, well, these players are players we've identified. And I can't remember who we talked to. We talked to somebody who said Siddiqui had been on the radar of the Liverpools and Man Cities, but they're in a position to say, well, he's only had 1 season. And they were waiting for his next season to say, well, can he kick on again? And then he's good enough for us. Whereas we were in a position to say, he's had 1 breakout season and now is the time to take that risk on that player for 20 million, let's say. I mean, and no, it might not be a gamble as such to say 20 million, but when you do that 4, 5, 6 times in one window, it becomes a big gamble. I mean, you look across our front 5 or whatever it is, you look at, the likes of Talby, Adingra, who's obviously got more experience, but you've got Siddiqui, Diarra, all kind of 21, 20 years old and had that 1 breakout season. So we had to take that risk, as Mark said. It was a huge gamble, and you have to take your hat off that they went all in on that. Kind of that they said, right, well, this is the way we're going to do it. This is our strategy, and we're going all in. And we had to pull. I mean, Leeds fans were going absolutely nuts during the summer because they were linked with someone in the Warman and Aaron, and we just bought them. And as soon as Leeds were linked, we'd already signed on the dotted line. And the outline of a couple of outliers, of course, with Xhaka and maybe Alderete, who were really kind of highly rated. Michele didn't quite get in the team. Now, going through all of this, you're wondering in January, are we now in a position where, do we kind of move on slightly? Do we look for players who aren't as much of a risk, who have maybe had 2, 3, 4 years playing in the Europa League or Conference League or at that sort of level? The market's right across Europe. So you do wonder if, because we're getting ourselves into that first position in terms of almost, let's say almost securing Premier League football next season, that we can accelerate that progress. Because let's say we were 16th, 17th and 3 points above the bottom 3, we might still have to take those risks and we might be shopping from a different list. Potentially, we've gone on to the next list that we maybe weren't expecting to go to till the summer. So again, it just goes into the pot of just being exciting, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting for me with Sunderland is kind of a lot of teams, I think, in the Premier League are kind of not entirely sure what their identity is. They're not entirely sure what their kind of recruitment profile is. So what they end up doing, they won't sign the players that Sunderland have signed because it's almost like we have to kind of aspire to be something that we're kind of like, we have to kind of move ourselves onto the next level. I mean, I cover Everton a little bit in my job as well. Everton could have signed all the players that Sunderland signed, right? But I think there's this kind of like notion that if you're an established Premier League team, you can't afford to take risks on those players. And the teams at the top 6, top 7, you've seen with Florian Wirtz and the problems that he's had at Liverpool, you can't take risks anymore because the scrutiny at that level is so high that you have 3, 4 bad games and you're suddenly written off as a flop. And Wirtz is against it. He's on a treadmill now. Whereas at Sunderland, it's this idea that you can kind of click in. You're going to get a bit of time. Nobody expected you to hit the ground running. It just so happens that 6 or 7 of those players have hit the ground running, and that's why Sunderland are doing so well. But Sunderland have this kind of recruitment profile that they knew what they wanted. They knew the sell. They knew how they were going to get those players. All the players that Sunderland signed in the summer, right? Can you remember? I mean, I remember covering Sunderland and transfer sagas. So many sagas down the years. I mean, Stephen Fletcher still brings me out in hives. It was weeks and weeks and weeks of it. Will it happen? Will it not happen? Every single one of those players, Sunderland were linked with them. They kept it. They had good relations with the agents, so it didn't leak out. It didn't leak out until very late in the deal, by which point those deals had really been done. Xhaka was the one where I think it kind of, yes, it went on a little bit long, but the player had been sold that. He wanted that move. That was going to happen. It was just Bayer Leverkusen they had to kind of come to an agreement with Erik ten Hag at the time. It was like internal politics there to kind of make it work for them. But that deal was always going to happen because that player wanted the deal. Every single one of those deals pretty much across the line. There was one or two, wasn't there? I think the goalkeeper who ended up at Bournemouth from Chelsea but they took a few risks like that. But then they had Gross to come in pretty much straight away. So that's where I think Sunderland did really well in the summer as well, was they were very much, all of those deals were lined up and it was very advanced before when it leaked out. None of those deals collapsed after the interest had leaked out. So that was where I think they did really well as well, because they kind of had those deals lined up before. By the time they kind of leaked out, they were done effectively.
And you mentioned in that piece about PSR as well, and all of those young players signed 5-year contracts. And you can imagine the conversation being, well, look, come to Sunderland, have a year in the Premier League, and look, if it goes wrong, we'll sell you for, we bought you for 20, we'll sell you for 25, 30, we'll make a little profit, you'll move on, everyone's a winner. But the other thing I just wanted to ask you on from that piece, Mark, was I think one of the little quotes you took from one of the agents was that Sunderland are part of the conversation. What does that mean in terms of, finances, to say they're part of the conversation because they can pay the money now that the rest of them are paying? Or does it mean they're part of the conversation because players are looking over there, they're seeing 4 20-year-olds in the midfield and going, actually, that looks exciting. That.
I think part of the conversation, what the agent I was talking to there was like, what he meant was Sunderland sell you a vision and they actually follow through with it. The difference was he was saying that there's other clubs that you kind of go and they'll say you'll play this amount of games and we'll do this with you and we'll do that with you. And I think he was talking about Chelsea as one of the clubs that kind of do sell this vision to young players of you can do this, you can do that. And he was like, they're part of the conversation because if you go to Sunderland, they will play you. They will take those risks. And I think I did a piece kind of...
Look at Job. Job is the big example, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just about to say, funnily enough, it was 12 months ago when they were in the Championship. And I think I did a piece about how they'd kind of like, because obviously they were high flying at the time. And it was the British market where agents were saying, if Sunderland are true, you sign, we're coming out of Premier League teams and we're getting offers from kind of teams in Europe and other teams in the Premier League. And they're saying, come, you can fight it out. And this was what happened with Chris Rigg as well, by the way, and why he ended up re-signing at Sunderland, because they told him, you will get games here. And they believed him. And he did get games. And, I think he will get more games this season as well. He's very young to be playing in a team that get into that get promoted from the Championship. So they're part of the conversation because the way that they sell the project, they've backed it up with taking risks on players. Whereas a lot of teams in the Premier League will sell you the world, and then what we play 2 or 3 games, we're kind of the manager isn't really aligned. And I think that's the other thing that's really noticeable about when you talk to agents about Sunderland is you've got the director of football, you've got Christian Speakman, you've got the owner who takes a lot of, I think is pretty hands-on when it comes to recruitment as well. But you've got the manager and it's alignment. So all 4 of them are singing from the same hymn sheet, and they all 4 of them say the same thing. I cover other clubs where, look, the director of football historically has said one thing, the manager's saying another thing. They don't, there's not an alignment there because the manager wants one thing. The director of football is trying to say, look, we need to sign younger players and get. At Sunderland, it's very much, this is the one thing that everybody inside the club says. The owner says the same thing as the director of football, who says the same thing as the manager. So therefore, if you buy a player, there's full buy-in from all 3 or 4 now because Gisolfi's there as well. And that's why they're part of the conversation, because agents believe what they say. And I think that's what's really, really interesting. And that message has got through to agents in France, it's got through to agents in kind of Belgium, it's got through to agents in Spain and Portugal as well. And that's why I think Sunderland are able to get their foot in the door on some of these big deals. And that's what you saw in the summer. Gisolfi came in, he liked what he heard, and he was able to kind of open his contacts book, and Sunderland got those players.
Yeah, well, we'll go for a quick break and then we'll come back and chat about the derby since we've got the juices flowing with transfers and stuff. See you in a minute.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like needing the protection of an offensive guard on the football field, but getting an elementary school crossing guard. Sure, they're both guards, but you can only trust one to keep your quarterback safe when the game is on the line. So don't settle for just any insurance when there's State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. You're ready to move your business forward, but first, you need to find the right team. Start your search with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It can help you reach qualified candidates fast, ensuring your listing is the first one they see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs are 90% more likely to report a hire than non-sponsored jobs. See the results for yourself. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
In Walmart, Sue Newville, time was ticking away. Only a few nights left till the big holiday. But last-minute gifters had no need to worry. Walmart Express Delivery got their gifts in a hurry. From Nintendo to Nespresso and Lego flowers, they could check off their lists in as fast as an hour. All of Who Newville, East, West, South, and North could order gifts up until 5 p.m. on December 24th. So this holiday, just do as the Who's do. With gift delivery this fast, they all gasped. From Walmart, who knew? Subject to availability, terms and fees apply.
And welcome back to Haway The Podcast, sponsored by Live Score Bet. And just before the break there, we were chatting a little bit about transfers, but I am going to bring the conversation back around to the derby with it being at the weekend. And obviously for you, Mark, like you said before, you're a neutral, so you can sit there and you can be pretty pleased that it's just going to be a good game and stuff. But I want to ask you a little bit about kind of the respective rises of the two clubs, because obviously Newcastle's rise, I guess, has been well noted, won a trophy last year, played quite a lot of Champions League football in recent years. But for Sunderland, it's been a bit different. We've done things a little bit differently. We've been, become a club, I guess, that a lot of other clubs, maybe lower placed than us now, probably aspire to be like. They see Sunderland with a young team, with an ambitious owner, and they're like, that's how I want my club to be, But how do you weigh that up coming into this game? The fact that, Newcastle, with their ownership, and that's been well documented, and Sunderland's ownership seem to have almost met on an equal footing ahead of this game, where, Sunderland are only 1 point ahead of Newcastle, and obviously there's quite a lot in terms of the what's in stake, in terms of the passion and all the rest of it. But in terms of league position, we're pretty equally placed. So how do you view that, considering you used to rock about the Stadium of Light when it was the short era and it was very, very different?
Yeah, I mean, what was really interesting about the kind of short era and the rivalry then was that, I mean, I've actually done a piece for this weekend with a player I won't say too much about it because it's kind of coming out of the weekend, but he was actually saying that in his experience at the time, Sunderland's team probably wasn't as talented as the Newcastle team, but they had more. There was kind of more passion. There was more team spirit at the time. They knew the importance of the rivalry, maybe a little bit more than Newcastle did. I think the difference is this time is that you've got a lot of very good players, but because I think the two teams are better run than they were back then. You've also got players who've come in and have been profiled really well. So they understand, they're very good players, but they also understand the importance of the derby as well. So I think what you're going to see on Sunday, I hope, is the kind of the passion, but also a really good game that's going to have a little bit more. It's going to be a little bit higher quality than maybe some of those games back in particular the last derby. I think that I can remember where I think it was a really poor Newcastle team came. It was John Carver's Newcastle team. I think came and got wiped out by Sunderland, and that was a very memorable game for Sunderland. But I think a poor quality game really, because the two teams were kind of battling out at the bottom. But because they're kind of up there now, I would liken this a little bit more to. Do you remember the kind of? I'm remembering. I think it would be the Roy Keane kind of Kevin Keegan era was the first derby that I saw where the two teams were actually fairly good, and then you went into Martin O'Neill, and I think was it Alan Pardew maybe at the time, but the two teams were actually pretty good at the time. Maybe it was Steve Bruce. I can't remember. Seen so many derbies down the years there, but there were actually two teams that were. I was saying this is two teams that are actually a really good team, but are going for it, and I feel that feels a little bit more like this. There was a lot of kind of derby games which were down at the bottom where it was all about relegation. I remember a 1-1 where it was Sam Allardyce and Rafa Benitez, two really good managers, but a poor game really, I think, to be honest, at St James's Park. Newcastle got a very fortunate draw in the end. I think they were pretty much second best for most of that game, but it was a poor game. I think this is a different game. I think this is very different from the FA Cup game a few years ago as well, because I think you've got two teams that are, I think, this season fairly evenly matched, because Newcastle haven't been that good away from home and Sunderland have been very good at home. And what I think Sunderland fans should hang their hat on is this Sunderland team do not know when they're beaten. That Arsenal game a few weeks ago was an absolutely perfect example of a team that really should have been dead and buried in the second half when Arsenal played probably some of their best football I've seen Arsenal play this season. But Sunderland clung on till the end. And by the end, the last 10 minutes, Sunderland were the better team and almost could have, they could have won the game. They could have won the game at the end. That was how mad that game was. That is what I think you'll see from Sunderland this weekend is they won't know when they're beaten. If Newcastle are going to have periods on top, I think Sunderland are going to have periods on top as well. So I think it's going to ebb and flow. And I think it's going to be a really high quality game. There's going to be a big factor of Newcastle playing in Europe in midweek as well. And I think it's a game that Eddie Howe can't afford to rest players in. So I think some of the players who start on Sunday will have played tomorrow against Bayer Leverkusen. So does that factor into it? I think it may do, because we've seen before big Champions League games, then you've got travel as well. You are fatigued by the end of that. So Newcastle are going to have to use their squad a little bit. Sunderland are going to get a full week coming at it off the back of, I think, looked a little bit fatigued on Saturday. Actually, Sunderland looked like they put a lot into that game at Anfield, and maybe coming up against a really good Man City team that can do that to anybody, by the way. It isn't, there's no disgrace to lose the way that Sunderland lost on Saturday, because Man City can do that to teams. They've not been as consistent as they have been previous years, but they can do that to teams. But you've got to remember, Sunderland are coming off the back of a huge performance against Liverpool in midweek, in which I think they should have won that game, to be honest with you. And if they had have done that, to then go into Man City, having expended that much amount of energy, you've also got, I think, the factor for Sunderland of it being the final game for the AFCON games, which I think will play into things. I think it will, those players will want to sign off on a really positive note, and I think it will have that kind of psychological factor as well. Newcastle also have a big Carabao Cup game on Wednesday as well, so Eddie Howe's going to have to balance his resources. I remember a game where Newcastle played, I think, on the Thursday, and Sunderland played in the I think it was Europa League at the time, quarter-final. Then they played Paolo Di Canio's Sunderland and lost 3-0 because they kind of they were gone by the end, and Sunderland came into it like with no fear and slapped Newcastle, to be perfectly honest, in the second half of that game. So will that play into it? I think it will. And what's been amazing, I think, if you take a step back, Sunderland have come on so far in the space of 2 years to be kind of in a position where you say there isn't a lot in this game. And that FA Cup game a few years ago was like men versus boys, to be honest with you. Sunderland just, I think partly because Michael Beale didn't set them up particularly well for that game, because Newcastle were there to be got at because they weren't playing particularly well at the time. But obviously Sunderland stepped off a little bit, allowed Newcastle to assert themselves. Joelinton kind of did what he did. Isak did what he did. Bruno Guimaraes did what he did. And it felt a bit like there was men against boys there. I don't think that's going to be the case this weekend, is it? Because Sunderland have players who show no fear. You know, Xhaka has played in these games before. He's played in Northern derbies. He's played in big games in Germany where he's won. He's played in games where he's Champions League games, big games in the World Cup. It's not going to be it's a big game, and he knows it's a big game, but it's not going to be the be all and end all. It's not going to be the biggest game of his career like it maybe was for some of those players a few years ago against Sunderland. So it feels very much equal. I think, look, Newcastle have got the pedigree in the Premier League. They've got players who've, been there, seen it, done it. They finished 5th last year. They're a top Premier League outfit. So, from that perspective, if you take all of the kind of other factors out of it, Newcastle probably would be slight favourites. But I think there's so many factors going into this. Newcastle's away form, Sunderland's home form, mean that it's really too close to call for me. And that's going to be so fascinating, because there's going to be, I think the atmosphere is going to be something special. I really do. 2:00 kickoff as well, rather than I hate 12 o'clocks. 2 o'clock so much better. You get a bit more time to kind of build up to it a little bit.
Well, opens at 8 o'clock in the morning, so there'll be people who've got 6 hours of drinking in them walking into the stadium light.
I say that, it was like, what was it? The 12 o'clock kickoff, people were still getting on it at about 6 o'clock in the morning, weren't they? So it wasn't like a big problem. But I think the fact that it's in the stadium light is a big advantage to Sunderland as well, because Newcastle's away form. They did beat Everton, and see what happens tomorrow in Germany, but their away form has been poor. They haven't got the balance of how to play away from home particularly well yet. So it will be interesting because, they did put it on Everton a few weeks ago, but they started quite poorly in that game, and Everton had a chance, didn't they? Didn't score the chance, but if they'd started well, and Newcastle's game management hasn't been brilliant the last few weeks. They did beat Burnley at the weekend, but they nearly chucked it away against 10 men. So game management wise, theirs hasn't been very good. Sunderland's has been absolutely outstanding. Their game management's been probably one of the best things that they've done this season. Reggie has done really well from that perspective. He's made the changes when he needed to. He's changed formation. He's been fearless about sort of almost admitting when he's made a mistake and kind of changing things in game. Whereas I think Eddie Howe hasn't maybe been quite as good at that. He's been a bit more reactive than he has been in previous seasons. So, battle of the bosses as well, which is really interesting because Labrie hasn't done too much wrong, has he? Apart from the Fulham game, I can't think of any times this season where I've looked at it and said, could have done something different there, whereas probably with Eddie Howe, there has been 1 or 2 occasions where you'd say maybe he's made the wrong selection calls there. So, I think it's very, very tight this weekend. And what a result for Sunderland to be able to say that, given where you were at the start of the season. You'd have said this would have been it would have been an uphill battle for Sunderland to go into it kind of as equal contenders, but they are, I think.
Yeah, that what Mark just touched on there, Chris, about the till the end spirit, which it has become something which has defined this team in recent years, is something which I'm kind of hanging my hat on. Whether we play well or we don't play well, we seem to just have this thing at the Stadium of Light where it doesn't matter who the opponent is, what situations have been thrown up in games, we just have something in us where we just keep on going and we find ways to score goals. And Mark touched on it there about Newcastle playing in midweek. That's going to have to play a part. It has to, because they're going to exert, and we were recording this before Newcastle playing midweek, so they could blow Leverkusen away and, totally throw this point to pot. But me point, while I sit here right now, is that they're going to have a really exhausting experience playing away in Europe, and then have to get their heads around playing Sunderland, which, it might not be the biggest game of the season to the players and the manager, I don't know, but to the fans of Newcastle and the fans of Sunderland, this is the biggest game of the season so far. So it almost feels like it's going to have to play a part for Sunderland if we are going to win this game, that we will keep going right until the end.
Yeah, well, just on Newcastle playing away, because I saw Eddie Howe made it very clear that he wasn't going to rest anyone and he was going to play his strongest 11 that he could put out against Bayer Leverkusen, which, I think that probably went without, he didn't really have to say it, because, look, it's a Champions League. Newcastle, it's not dependent, but, there's so much finance has come from the Champions League that he hasn't got a choice to do that. But you look at Newcastle in that game, and either way, you think, right, well, if they go and beat Bayer Leverkusen, there's an element of the Newcastle players going, right, job done. On the plane on the way back, job done, done a really good job. Right, it's Sunderland at the weekend. Right, I've got to get myself back up for that. If they get beat against Bayer Leverkusen, it's almost like, oh, right, well, we're almost out, we're struggling in the Champions League. Oh, now we've got to go to Newcastle. So in both scenarios, it's going to take a lot of man management to get that squad, talking to them back on the plane and getting them back up for this game at the weekend. It doesn't matter how the game pans out. That there's almost work to do from a Newcastle point of view to get that squad right mentally to what's coming at the weekend. And what you're saying there about till the end, Gav, and it's absolutely, we couldn't have kind of marketed it any better, of course, for the playoffs and what's happened since. The unbelievable moments, the Arsenal moment and all of that. And potentially there could have been one at Anfield, but we'll kind of skip over that. But the main point is, building up to a derby game, is that, we're talking about till the end, but what creates that? And it's the atmosphere of almost every single league game we've had this season. we've gone into it like a cup tie. It hasn't been, in seasons past, you've thought league games just kind of keep rolling and the players get into this, almost kind of routine of, Saturday, or there's another one on Saturday, there's another one on Saturday. We've taken each one as its own thing and almost said this is like a cup final, and we've got all our focus on this game. And whoever it is, whether it's Wolves at home, Bournemouth, you saw the reaction to going 2-0 down against Bournemouth, and it was going, no, we're not out of this. It's not like, oh well, we've got another one next week. It's we're not going to be out of this game until the final whistle goes. And we ended up getting 3 points, and that's the mentality. It's we're going to win this game because we have to win this game, and then we're not going to worry about next week. And you showed in the Manchester City game. A lot of people said, well, Siddiqui and Xhaka's on a yellow card. Let's get them out. Let's get some other players in. And Register Brady went, no. And you say that, and you're absolutely right, Mark. That can happen to anyone at Manchester City. But for half an hour, we were brilliant. Manchester City at half-time had 2 shots on goal, and they were 2-0 up. And, it goes back to that was a really good performance. And I'm sure that's what the manager and the coaching staff have been telling the players to say, look, that was absolutely brilliant. Keep doing that to more sides and we'll get at least a point or whatever on the road, if not all 3, because we had a couple of chances. And, if we're on a different day, that game could have been completely different. So we're going to be, and this is what I think we've got a slight, and I'm going to say this, as a Sunderland fan, I'm going to clutch at any straws, but I think we've potentially got a slight advantage in a game such as a derby because of the way we've been playing every other game. We've been playing every other game like a cup tie, like a derby, and we've got that intensity. And the Newcastle United players, and Mark again said that these players have got Premier League pedigree and they've been finishing in the top 6, top 7 of the Premier League last 3 seasons. They've all got egos. And for the last few years, Sunderland have been those neighbours that they know the fans don't like and they can, join in with taking the mick and all this. But now Sunderland are back and almost on an even kind of keel with them. So the Newcastle players have now got to kind of almost get their ego in check and say, right, well, that they've got to be ready for this test and not just think of Sunderland as this team that they can just kind of slap about, and they know that they've got to be in for a game. And I just think when you've got players with egos like that and that comes into it, I just think that all the pressure is on Newcastle. Because it's almost, let's say Newcastle win this, it's kind of, well, yeah, you kind of expect it to. But if they get beat, it's almost, well, Sunderland, a newly promoted side, you should be winning that game. So I just think all the pressure's on Newcastle for this game.
I would agree with that. And I'm going to say that. But I think Chris makes a really good point there, Mark, about how almost literally every home game since that Coventry game have felt like a derby, like a big game, like a massive occasion. And these players have experience of that. I know they're not actually derby games. This will feel very, very different once again. But that pressure of playing in a raucous atmosphere, with the tifos and the various other things going on, and just the sense of occasion. We've talked about it pretty much every time we play at home on this podcast. The fact that every single home game this season has felt like an occasion. I've got to say, I do think that's going to play its part. I think when you talk about nerves and some teams can fold under the pressure of playing in a derby game. We've seen it loads of times. But this Sunderland team have been in loads of high pressure games recently together and have come through them. And I keep talking about this till the end thing, but it is the truth. How do you think Newcastle, specifically Eddie Howe, his big leaders in the squad, how do you think they will be? Because they're not going to be thick and they're not going to be going into this and like completely oblivious to this. They're going to understand that like Sunderland are a little bit different to the usual team that you play in the Premier League. So how do you think they're going to weigh that up? How are they going to tackle it? Given they've played in cup finals, they've played in Champions League games, they've got big game experience too.
Yeah, I think the one thing you would say about Newcastle that probably stands them in a little bit better stead than probably previous Newcastle teams that we've seen where they've come and maybe not quite understood how important the derby is. They have got players like Dan Burn. They have got players like, they've got Lewis Miley in there, who's a local lad as well. They do have players in there. And I think one of the things about Bruno Guimaraes is he's almost like British mentality in a way that he does. He's not a kind of dilettante. He's not like a Brazilian kind of dilettante. He's not like he's fairly, he's a almost like got that British mentality of fight to win and stuff. So I think probably I'm not too worried from a Newcastle perspective about them coming and kind of getting blown away, because I think they have got dressing room leaders in there, as Sunderland have got dressing room leaders. And that's why I'm so excited about this game, because I do think that this is two teams that will probably come and play their A game. What I fear with Newcastle a little bit is the fact that they've played in midweek and the energy levels. Can you maintain those energy levels over 90 minutes when you've done everything that you've done over in midweek? And also the other thing, which is I think shouldn't be lost as well, is that Sunderland have got the whole week to work on a game plan, and we know that Labrie is very good at that. He is tactically, I think he's probably as astute as any Sunderland manager I've ever come across. The thing with Newcastle is if they've played on Wednesday, they've obviously all the build-up, all the shape work, all the tactical stuff is working on what they're doing on Wednesday. Travel back on Wednesday. Thursday's maybe a recovery session. You've probably got Friday and Saturday to kind of work on this game. It's not a lot of time for a manager in Eddie Howe who does like to kind of, systems and tactics are really important to him. I know they will have had analysts working on this game and what they need to do and stuff, but it is a much shorter turnaround. So I think I'm not too worried about mentality-wise Newcastle, because I think they have got those big characters in the dressing room. They have got people who know about the game. So I think, atmosphere-wise, I don't think they've experienced anything like Sunderland on Sunday, because it's just going to be a ferocious kind of different atmosphere. Newcastle haven't had any derbies. They've played a lot of big games, but there's something different about a derby. They got about 10 minutes of it 2 years ago, didn't they? Until it was very obvious where that game was going, and it all sort of like flattened. And we were saying before the podcast, it almost felt like it wasn't really, it was a quasi derby, because the atmosphere just wasn't, it was so mismatched. It just didn't feel like it was. They won't have played in a derby, but I don't think mentality wise, I'm worried about Newcastle from that perspective. Like I'm not worried about Sunderland from that perspective, because I think they've got the dressing room leader, the biggest dressing room leader in the Premier League in terms of Granit Xhaka. So I think both teams will be pumped up. Both teams will know what they're doing. I think it will be decided really in those final stages. I think it's going to be a tight game. I think you mentioned till the end. If Newcastle are ahead, or if they're level at the points at which Sunderland, we know Sunderland comes strong at the end. They have done that. I don't know whether it's a mentality thing. I don't know whether till the end has almost become part of the DNA at Sunderland. Is it the fans that kind of like anticipate something special happening at the end of the game? I think that's going to play into it, because that's when fatigue will set in from midweek from Newcastle. That's when Newcastle will have to use their squad particularly well to kind of get over that bit at the end, because Sunderland are going to have fresh legs to bring on at that point if they need to. So I think if the game's tight running into the final minutes, we've seen this Sunderland team do it time and time and time again, pretty much since the Coventry game at the back end of last season. I can't think of too many games where Sunderland haven't impacted games at the end of matches. They've always come on strong. They haven't always got the win or the draw. They haven't lost at home for such a long time, which I think does kind of factor into things, doesn't it? It does have an impact, I think, that as well. But that's where I think that this game's going to be won or lost. I don't think it's going to be a mentality thing necessarily, because I think both teams. I wouldn't have said that with Newcastle teams of yore. I would have said that there have been Newcastle teams that have kind of wilted in that pressure before, and Sunderland haven't really done that. Sunderland haven't really wilted under pressure in derbies since probably the last time that they won at Stadium of Light in the league, which was kind of 2012, was it 2011? Maybe was the last time they won in the league. That was the last time I think Sunderland really didn't perform and didn't turn up in a home derby game. But I don't think this will be a Newcastle team that will wilt in the pressure, but they could end up getting pegged back at the end because of fatigue and everything that goes into it, and Sunderland kind of doing the kind of till the end thing at the end. So that's where I think this game's going to be kind of won. You wouldn't take your eyes off it until 98, 99 minutes or whatever it's going to end up being.
Yeah, can I just quickly ask about that time that you said Eddie Howe's got to work with the team? Does it make it even more difficult? Because me, Gav, and the rest of the lads who try and second guess what Regis Labrie's going to do in every game, and we always completely fail because he's always got something up his sleeve. Is that another part of it? Because Eddie Howe must be looking at Sunderland going, well, is it 5 at the back? Is it going to be 4 at the back? Is it going to be, what are they going to do? Because he switches it up. Is Trey Hume going to come into midfield? So he does so many different things. Eddie Howe he hasn't got that time to plan for 2 or 3 different scenarios, has he?
Yeah, and I think what Eddie Howe has traditionally been really good at is kind of being reactive in games and doing some really good game management and stuff. But actually, it's been probably one of the things that I think people have. I don't know whether they've overthought it a little bit at times this season, and the way they've played away from home this season has been different from the way they've tried to play the last time they were in the Champions League, when they basically just said, we aren't going to give an inch, basically. We're just going to do exactly what we do at home, away from home, in the Champions League and in the Premier League as well. So that was the way that they were playing. It feels like they've kind of changed the way that they've played to conserve energy, maybe for the amount of games that they've got to play. What we saw, I think, with Newcastle the other week was that they did try and, as I said, put it on Everton a little bit. Will they do that to Sunderland? Maybe there's a bit of chess going on there, because maybe Sunderland think that's what Newcastle are going to do. We're going to kind of come up with a solution to kind of counter that as well. So I think there is a massive tactical battle that's going to go on. And I think Newcastle have to be prepared to change whatever it is that they're doing based on what Sunderland are doing as well, which is what the teams that have been beaten by Sunderland haven't been able to do. I think that's what Chelsea weren't able to do. Chelsea did not anticipate Sunderland playing the way that they did at Stamford Bridge. And that's why I think Sunderland won that game. They didn't anticipate them doing that. I don't think Everton, obviously Everton kind of, I think in that game, they had so much momentum that the way that Sunderland then changed at half time, and it wasn't, there was a lot of talk of like, Granit Xhaka got into them at half time and all this. And he did say that after the game, didn't he? But I think actually you could see the subtle tweaks in the way that Sunderland played in the second half of that game. They changed things really, really well. So I think that's a massive challenge for Newcastle. And obviously they because they've got fresher legs, Sunderland, it is going to be the opportunity to kind of go in. Because I don't think if Newcastle play the high intensity way that they like playing, I don't think they're going to be able to maintain those levels through 90 minutes, given that they've played midweek and they played at the weekend and they played in midweek the week before as well. And they've obviously got a game coming up the week after as well. You are going to be, they have got a good sports science team who've kind of, I think have changed the way they've played. So they have been more successful in the Champions League, but I think it has impacted their Premier League form, in particular in away games where they haven't probably played at the high intensity way that they've been really good at. So yeah, I think it does. It is a really interesting factor, and the fact that it's what Sunderland have been different. It's why Sunderland have been different, hasn't it? The manager has been difficult to call. It's been really difficult to call, and they recruited players in the summer who I think are tactically really astute, and they're bought into the way that Sunderland's manager wants them to play, which is really, really interesting, because you kind of, you wouldn't anticipate players that young being quite as tactically fluent as they are. But I think it is an overseas thing. I think it is French players, kind of Belgian players. They do tend to they tend to be a bit more tactically fluent than maybe some of the younger English players that kind of come in who like to know systems and how they play, and are kind of, wait for the manager to kind of tell them how to play. You see it with, you mentioned a few players there who can maybe play a variety of different positions. And that's why Sunderland, I think, have been really good so far this season. And they have been difficult to call, difficult to predict how they're going to play. And I don't know how they're going to set up on Sunday. I anticipate that I think they're going to go really fast. They're going to come out of the blocks and they're going to try and put it on Newcastle in the way that Newcastle try and put it on other teams, and go toe to toe with Newcastle and not give them an inch, because they're going to try and feed the kind of energy of the crowd as well, and sort of try and get a bit of a foothold in the game early on. But, I'm not Reggie Liberi, and in no circumstances would I say that I kind of tactically anywhere near as kind of savvy as these top guys. But that's what I think they'll do. And I think it'll be really interesting. And then the game will lull in the middle, and then at the end, it's going to be like some kind of grandstand finish. And it's going to be so tight. It's going to be so tight throughout. I really think it will be.
Well, chaps, I think I could sit and talk about this all night, and the adrenaline's pumping, and Mark, I can see you getting carried away. People knew what time this was. They would be thinking, where's all this energy coming from? They must have drank lots of coffee this lot. But yes, we will wrap it up for tonight. But thank you very much, mate. I've really, really enjoyed that. And you're going to be sat there on Sunday, I'm sure, just loving it, but we'll be bringing it. I'll probably go 10 Guinness deep just to try and make myself I'm all right now, but I know for a fact on match day I'll need a bit of help with curving the nerves. But thank you very much for coming on, mate. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. I'd love to do it again soon.
Yeah, brilliant, mate. And cheers, Chris. Thank you very much, mate.
Yeah, I would say I enjoyed it, but Mark going on about the last 10 minutes already of the game, I'm like, I'm already nervous for that. Never mind, I'm nervous for kickoff. Never mind the last 10 minutes of the game. I'm already thinking about how it's going to all play out. I mean, the only prediction I think we can make is a Siddiqui yellow card. I think that's the only thing we can say about the whole afternoon.
Yeah, he'll be the one going in after 21 seconds and chopping someone down. That was like Animal's job. Yeah, you remember him doing it at Daryl Janmat? You just knew he was going to hit him every time. And he always got booked.
He did, yeah. Him and Czech Tiote, wasn't it, back in the day? They both. Yes. It was one of those two would go in early doors early on. Yeah, Katz always did that, didn't he?
Yeah, we'll see what happens. But thank you very much, lads. Thank you very much to the listeners for joining us as always. If you're not subscribed yet, get subscribed to Haway The Podcast. We are here every single day on the feeds, free of charge. Sometimes twice a day, depending if we've got a game. So make sure you get subscribed. We've got loads coming up as we build up to the game at the weekend, and then afterwards as well. We'll be here with all the fallout. We won't be going anywhere. We won't be hiding for 300 episodes. Don't worry. I did threaten that briefly the other day, but yes, we won't go into hiding. We will still be here regardless of the result, win, lose or draw. So make sure you check back with us. But yes, we'll be back tomorrow. So on from us. Bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here. Wishing you a very happy half-off holiday, because right now Mint Mobile is offering you the gift of 50% off unlimited. To be clear, that's half price, not half the service. Mint is still premium, unlimited wireless for a great price. So that means a half day. Yeah? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speeds slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.